Hi, everyone. Welcome to part one of SCIO's On the Road Again Vehicle Modification Peer Connection series. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we live and work on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations across Turtle Island. While we meet today on a virtual platform, we must recognize the importance of the land and our treaty agreements. We acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territories of all Inuit, Métis, and First Nations peoples. Further, we reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improve our own understanding of Indigenous peoples, their cultures, and their histories. Let us acknowledge our privilege and work together to decolonialize systems as we begin to engage in new ways of learning, being, and doing. Let us build relationships that honor and uphold the voice and values of our Indigenous hosts. As our Spinal Cord Injury Ontario community encompasses many geographies, we ask that everyone take a few moments of their day to find out which unceded or treaty territories you may live and work on. You can use the link www.native-land.ca to learn more. Before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping. Today's presentation will be recorded. If you do not want your name displayed, you can change it. If you need assistance with that, please reach out using the chat function, and any questions you may have can be submitted using the chat function as well. The On the Road Again Vehicle Modification Series is sponsored by Silver Cross Automotive, and the sponsor and presenter of part one of the series is the National Mobility Equipment Dealers Association of Canada, also known as NMEDA Canada. Without further ado, let's get this show on the road.
Hello, my name is Errol. I sustained a spinal cord injury in 2006. What it meant for me to be able to drive again is obviously that it allowed me the freedom to choose what I wanted and needed to accomplish without the need to rely on other people or agencies to dictate my schedule day to day. It became a tremendous asset with respect to attending appointments, therapy and massage sessions. Grocery shopping and social events were now at my leisure and not according to someone else's time frame. It gave me the opportunity to arrive as well as, and sometimes more importantly, to leave wherever I was according to my needs and preferences. Finally, I had the pleasure of becoming my mother's full-time caregiver after she suffered 2 strokes in early 2016 and subsequently passed in late 2019. As one could imagine, having a vehicle in that situation was truly a blessing for us. To be able to pack us up into the van day to day and take ourselves to various appointments, shopping, see friends and relatives, or just to go for an afternoon or evening ride and share conversations over coffee, I now see as a true blessing, as I was able to spend quality time with Mom driving all over Ontario before she passed. Memories I will always have with me. So for those who are considering driving again, don't be afraid. Don't make your injury a barrier if at all possible. You'll make your own beautiful memories that will last a long time. Who knows? We might run into each other at a local Tim Hortons drive-thru. See you all on the highways and byways. All the best and safe driving.
And now on to our NMEDA presentation.
Hi there, I'm Tamalee Stone. I'm an occupational therapist and certified driver rehabilitation specialist, although we say CDR in Ontario. I want to welcome you today to Getting Started, the driver assessment and rehabilitation process, with the On the Road Again presentation. And we're presenting segment 1 on behalf of the National Mobility Equipment Dealers Association. So today with us, we have David Parton, who is president of NAMITA Canada, myself, and Shah Bakar. Shah and myself are both occupational therapists and certified in driver rehabilitation. And we also hold positions on the NAMITA Canada board. I sit as vice president and he serves as the professional associate rep, as well as chair of the partner relations committee. I also serve as the president of the Ontario chapter of the Association for Driver Rehabilitation Specialists, or ADED for short. Technical difficulties. One moment, please. Great. So today what we're hoping to accomplish is to provide some information about the key players in the industry, the importance of community mobility, provide an overview of the licensing system. We are based in Ontario. We know that this is going to be available to others in other provinces. Hopefully some of the information will be transferable to those other locations. We're also going to provide you an overview of the driver assessment and training process and available equipment on the market. There are going to be other presentations in the series that are going to get into more specific or more exciting types of equipment that might be available for you. However, we're going to give an overview of that today. As well, we'll touch briefly on some sources of funding that may be available. So questions you may have, and hopefully we'll be able to provide you with adequate answers. What is NAMITA? What is ADED? What do I need to know to navigate the licensing system? What is a functional driving assessment? And why do I need one? How do I learn to drive with special controls? What types of equipment or conversions are there? How do I pay for what I need? And how do I get adaptive equipment or an accessible vehicle? And that's what we're going to hopefully be able to answer for you today. The key players. The National Mobility Equipment Dealers Association is only one of the players within the driver rehab industry. The Association for Driver Rehabilitation Specialists is another of those key associations. Occupational therapists with training in driver rehabilitation. And there are also vehicle modifiers, as well as adaptive mobility equipment dealers. Those are the folks that do the installations for the adaptive equipment that you may require, as well as the conversions to vehicles to make them more accessible to you. Then we have associations such as Spinal Cord Injury Ontario, other fund organizations, and the most important piece of the puzzle are you, the consumers. So now I'm going to hand off to David, who's going to talk about data.
Thank you, Emily. David Parton here from the National Mobility Equipment Dealers Association. I am the Canadian president, Canadian chapter president. Our association is a voluntary association. A number of years ago, the Government of Canada, Transport Canada, was concerned about conversions that were being done. And they called together all of the companies that were doing conversions and asked them to agree to a set of standards. Out of that came to be the National Mobility Equipment Dealers Association. The purpose of our association is to ensure quality outcomes and safe conversions of vehicles. Safety is our #1 priority. So when you go to a company that is doing a conversion and they are a NAMITA member, you can be assured that they have met the standards of our quality assurance program. That means that they have been audited for proper performance. Every piece of equipment, every type of equipment that they work on, they have been duly trained by the manufacturer and certified as being able. Everybody doesn't do everything. So those stores, if you're doing one particular type of conversion and you advertise yourself as being able to do that, NAMITA ensures that you have insurance in place, that you have training in place, that you have NAMITA certified technicians in place. And all of this is for the purpose of ensuring quality outcomes and safety for our clients. Next slide, Sean. Thanks. People that belong to NMETA, we have mobility equipment dealers and modifiers. We have conversion companies, the manufacturers that perform the work at a larger scale. We have adaptive driving equipment manufacturers that make hand controls and secondary controls, every different type of thing that would go into a vehicle that is a conversion from what the factory did originally. Automotive manufacturers, occupational therapists and driver rehabilitation specialists. Our organization, NMETA, treats ADED as a sister organization. In fact, if you get down to the nitty-gritty of the programs, the who we are, who we say we are, they match each other. We are two parts, two sides of one coin. We work together. It's like sometimes I say you go to a doctor and you get a prescription, and you go to the pharmacist and get the prescription filled. The occupational therapist prescription, the NMETA store, or your equipment modifier fills the prescription according to how it was written. But all these people belong to NMETA. Everybody doesn't belong to NMETA, unfortunately. We would like to have more. But in various parts of the country, NMETA is the gold standard. And so if you want to get work done, if you want the government to fund it, NMETA is where you have to turn. What do you need to know about NMETA dealers? They protect you. They undergo the annual inspection, as I said, the QAP audit. They're compliant with NMETA standards. There's a catalog, and in fact, anybody can look it up if they want. It's called QAP 103. It's a massive tome. And what it is the collective knowledge over the last 30 plus years of modifiers and how they do their work. And finding where the pitfalls are, where the issues are, and putting that into a standard which says that when you're doing this, this is how it's done. These rules also line up with the Canadian Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, as they do with the National Highway Safety Transportation in the States, NHTSA and CMVSS. We ensure that the provincial laws are being adhered to. We have technicians that are properly trained to install the equipment that we sell. We maintain proper insurance coverage. We have a 24-hour emergency service requirement for all of our members. And we have a mediation committee where if somebody feels that they did not get what they had been promised, or that they were not being fairly treated, NMETA maintains a mediation committee. A client can lodge a complaint, NMETA will investigate and will mediate. And we'll come up with an equitable solution for all involved. You don't have to go to court. You don't have to hire a lawyer. Go to the mediation committee. You still have all the other means are still at your disposal. But we would rather see people get what they need now and have it dealt with properly now. Take the guesswork out of safety. Safety, we have on our website in the NMETA USA, we've started putting up properly and duly tested vehicles. In order to pass, in order to be on the road, particularly for Canada, we have very stringent requirements. And so all the vehicles we post on our website, all vehicles that have taken the time and have them assessed and certified. In most cases, that means that some serious damage was done. When a conversion vehicle comes onto the road, first thing the vendor of it has to do is take and crash test and verify that there's no oil leak, there's no fuel leakage, that there's no excessive damage, that the car didn't just crumple up, the van didn't just crumple up. It has to meet the standards. And then we post those on our site saying that green light means this one met the standard. Red light, didn't go. Safety reviewed components. So anyways, what do I do? What do you do if you don't have a NMETA dealer in your area? Well, NMETA's practices are all readily available on the website. You can read it, you can see it. As I said, QAP 103 is available. Ask questions. There are lots of great vehicle modifiers out there, in and outside of NMETA. But you need to know, where's the training certificates? Are they certified on the specific equipment that you are buying from them or arranging to get through them? Or are they just subbing it out to somebody else? You want to be properly taken care of, and you want someplace you can turn around and go back to and ask questions and have your problem solved. Nothing in this world ever works perfectly all the time. It's how you handle things when things go wrong that determine who you are. And NMETA stands with you all the way. When you are trained and NMETA certified, that means something. We have a new website which is coming out, which is currently under bilingual conversion, so that we will be fully bilingual on our website. And on that website, there is a listing of all NMETA dealers and what areas that they are certified in. Here in Ontario, we have Cortland Mobility in Burlington. We have Convalade Liftability in Ottawa. We have Gold Line Mobility and Conversions in London. We have Mobility in Motion in Cambridge. North End Mobility in Welland. And Silver Cross Automotive has various locations in London, Ottawa, Waterloo, and Toronto. All of these stores are members of NMETA. And you can be confident when they offer you something that they stand behind it and that they have been duly certified and are ready to take good care of you.
Thank you, David. And so now I'm going to go over what ADED is all about. ADED stands for the Association for Driver Rehabilitation Specialists. It used to be called the Association for Driver Educators for the Disabled. And that is what it was known in the industry. And so it kept that acronym, although it is now more broad-minded and has a greater membership. It's a nonprofit professional association that was established in 1977 in the United States, but it is a North American association. The goal is to promote excellence in driver rehabilitation through leadership and advocacy to support safe, independent community mobility. And part of what they provide is education, as well as best practice guidelines that the members follow. So for example, Shaw and myself are members of ADED, and anyone working in the field of driver rehabilitation, that is an occupational therapist, a driving instructor, should be a member of ADED, because we follow what the standards are for the industry. It also provides us with a code of ethics so that everybody does what they're supposed to do the correct way. It also provides certification and credentialing. And there's different levels that they're now adding, so that people that may not be able to go and write a certification exam to become a CDRS or certified driver rehabilitation specialist can also demonstrate their knowledge and expertise. We belong to, Shaw and myself belong to one of the 12 chapters or satellites that ADED has across North America. We belong to the Ontario chapter, and I sit as that president. Shaw has been on that executive in the past as well. However, this is the only chapter that is represented only by Canadian representatives. And so we have, even though we're based in Ontario, we have people from British Columbia, Nova Scotia, Quebec that are members of our chapter, so that they're able to benefit from the education and the networking that we can provide. So who belongs to ADED? I've mentioned a few of these already: driving instructors and educators, occupational therapists, researchers, educators, vehicle modifiers and dealers also join as associate members, and adaptive equipment manufacturers. In Canada, primarily, with a few exceptions, occupational therapists are those that provide the evaluations, the driving assessments, with partnering with driving instructors who are also trained in driver rehabilitation. In the United States, however, there are also physiotherapists, speech language pathologists, voc rehab individuals, and kinesiologists who also are CDRS and do driving evaluations. Why is working with an ADED member important? Well, only ADED can grant the CDRS certification. And the way to become CDRS certified is to pass a rigorous exam. And you have to meet certain criteria in order to write that exam. You have to have a certain number of currency hours working in the field of driver rehabilitation. You have to have specific educational requirements. Sometimes those are degrees, like an occupational therapy degree, and sometimes those are an accumulation of working in that specific area. It requires continuing education, and we must maintain that every 3 years. We have to renew our CDRS, and we have to prove through certification and other credits that we have maintained that level of expertise and experience and knowledge in driver rehabilitation. So it's a lifelong learning experience. Most folks that are occupational therapists in Canada that work in the field of driver rehabilitation are called driver rehabilitation specialists, or DRS. In Canada, however, or specifically in Ontario, we have to identify ourselves as a CDR and drop the S. And that is because our regulatory body, our college, that allows us to practice as occupational therapists, do not allow us to identify ourselves as specialists. So therefore, we have been given special permission to identify ourselves as CDR, Certified in Driver Rehabilitation. Across the rest of Canada, you may come across those that have CDRS as their acronym. So where do you find a therapist and an instructor that works in driver rehab? The best resource is the ADED website. That's the primary resource and the standard bearer for all of driver rehabilitation. You can search by DRS or CDRS. And that directory, there's tabs that show up, and you basically search by your country, narrowing it down to your province. You can also narrow it down to a geographical area within kilometers from where you live. At this present time, there are 27 CDRSs in Canada, and Ontario has 13 of them. Shaw and myself are 2 of those 13. Now I'm going to hand the reins over to Shaw, and he's going to tell us why community mobility is important and share some information about the driving assessment process.
Okay, thank you, Tamalee. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. So I'll start by saying that everyone has their own unique community mobility needs. I want all of you for a moment to think about all the different things that you typically do out in the community, or are possibly restricted to do because of lack of driving or an accessible vehicle. When we as OTs ask our clients about their goals for driving or traveling in a personal vehicle, we often hear things like, I want to get back to campus and finish up my last year of university. Or I want to be able to go run errands on my own time without having to rely on friends or taxi services. Or I would love to start going out with my family again for dinners, or maybe even a road trip. Next slide, Emily.
Pardon me.
Many of us, unfortunately, have experienced a lot of cabin fever over the course of the pandemic. And I'm sure we could all agree that being stuck at home really sucks. The freedom to go out in the community unrestricted allows us to actively participate in the many roles that we play, whether that be of parent, student, friend, employee, or teammate. And in doing so, we bolster our self-worth and our quality of life. So, needless to say, getting back to driving and getting an accessible personal vehicle is a big deal for most people with physical impairments. Next, let's talk about, at a high level, the licensing system as it pertains to drivers with medical issues in Canada. In Canada, drivers with medical health issues have a right to have their license eligibility determined on the basis of an individual functional assessment. And the provinces or the provincial licensing authorities have a duty to accommodate. This accommodation can be achieved by appropriate licensing conditions, restrictions, or vehicle modifications. The Canadian Council of Motor Transportation Administrators, or the CCMTA, has developed a document called the Medical Standards for Drivers, and this is a document that is revised every year. The majority of the standards are then adopted by the provincial and territory vehicle departments. This process achieves a uniformity of standards across Canada, so that a person with a driver's license in one province or territory can easily exchange his or her driver's license in the event of a move to another province or territory. In Canada, physicians have a duty to report medical issues of their patients to the provincial licensing authority. We should note that in Ontario, fairly recently, occupational therapists and nurse practitioners were also granted the ability to report medical conditions through the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario. Now, there are some conditions, for example, uncontrolled epilepsy, that are considered unsafe for driving, and thus would result in a license suspension, at least until the seizures are well controlled, for example, by medications. Conditions that significantly affect physical or cognitive skills for driving, like a spinal cord injury or a traumatic brain injury, would also result in a medical suspension. But once the driver's health is stabilized, the licensing authority would likely require the driver to participate in a driving assessment. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the actual driving assessment and training process. It is important to note that a functional driving assessment or evaluation is not the same as a licensing road test. So it's not the same, for example, in Ontario, as your road test that you do with drive tests to get your license. A functional driver assessment is considered a medical assessment, which is completed by a healthcare professional, and is something that is required for people that have a medical condition that would likely impact driving. In Canada, functional driving assessments occur at driver rehabilitation centers. They're conducted by occupational therapists along with driving instructors with advanced training and experience in the field of driver rehabilitation. Training on adaptive driving controls is also done through the Driver Rehab Center and not your typical driving schools. In Ontario, the medical review section of the MTO, or the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario, will only accept reports from MTO-approved driver rehabilitation centers. A list of approved driver centers is readily available online and arranged by location. So if you go to Google and just write MTO approved driver rehab centers, you can find a list of possible centers that you can go to for your driving assessment. Now, I just want to note that the protocol may vary slightly from province to province, but in Ontario, if you are coming for a driving assessment and if your license is suspended, the Driver Rehab Center will obtain a one-day temporary license from the MTO for the purpose of the assessment. Now, I want all of you to think about driving for a moment. Okay, so driving is considered the most complex daily activity that the average person does. Driving requires a range of physical, visual, and cognitive skills at speeds of 40 to 100 kilometers plus for some of us speed demons, in an ever-changing driving environment. And for this reason, a functional driving evaluation or assessment is to ensure that drivers are medically safe to return to driving, or to ensure that a person that wants to get back to driving is a suitable candidate for training on adaptive driving controls based on their abilities. Aside from making sure that you're adequately able to operate the steering wheel and the gas and the brake pedals with or without adaptation, the occupational therapist or certified driver rehab specialist conducting the evaluation will also make sure that you are able to activate what we call time-critical secondary controls. So time-critical secondary controls refers to the wipers, wiper wash, indicators, horn, high beams, all the other things that you want to be able to operate while driving. The therapist will also assess your ability to enter and exit the vehicle and load, secure, and unload your mobility device safely. Many of you are probably wondering how much it costs to get back to driving. Unfortunately, I don't have a dollar amount for all of you. The cost varies from province to province, from city to city. So unfortunately, I can't give an exact dollar amount, but I will start by saying that unfortunately, the cost of a driving evaluation is not covered by OHIP. People that have been injured at work or because of a car accident may have access to funds through insurance to pay for driver rehab services, but otherwise it is considered to be an out-of-pocket expense. Before starting the process, we would urge all of you to do your research on the costs. So the cost of the initial assessment, what does training cost, how much is a progress evaluation, how much would a vehicle cost? So what kind of vehicle might I need? How much would that cost? Also, what is the cost of any special equipment or modifications that I would likely require? Okay. You could find out such costs by calling driver rehab centers in your area and by reaching out to vehicle modifiers in your area. Lastly, we would suggest that you don't start driver training until you have the money available to pay for all the likely sessions that you need and for the reassessment. And this would prevent any prolonged breaks in the process once you have started. And I'm sure Tamale has maybe encountered this where we're in the midst of training and we've only got halfway through and maybe done 5 training sessions, and then the client says, oh, I don't have any more money to continue. And then there's a gap of 3-4 months, and then they come back to us, and it's like we're kind of taking at least 3-4 steps back in their training because they've forgotten things. Okay, so once you get started, ideally you're able to go through the whole training process. So make sure you budget accordingly. We could break down the driver rehab process into 4 steps. The first step is the initial assessment. The second step is training on adaptive driving controls. The third is the reassessment and the vehicle prescription. And the last step is the actual installation of the equipment by a vehicle modifier and the vehicle checkout process. The driver assessment or evaluation basically has 2 main parts. The in-clinic evaluation, and that takes about an hour and a half, up to 2 hours, and then the on-road assessment, which may take about an hour or so. During the clinical evaluation, the occupational therapist will first go over the consent forms required to do the assessment and to release the report to the appropriate parties. The therapist will then review the medical history, medications, and driving history with you. During the assessment, the therapist will typically do some visual screening to ensure that you meet the minimum visual standards for driving and to rule out any obvious visual issues. The main focus of the clinical assessment for clients with physical conditions would be the physical assessment. So during the physical assessment, the therapist would assess your movement, strength, coordination, and sensation in the limbs to determine which types of adaptive controls would likely work best for you. The therapist may also complete some cognitive and visual perceptual tests to rule out any cognitive barriers or issues. During the on-road evaluation, the on-road evaluation, I should say, takes place with the occupational therapist and a driving instructor. The instructor's vehicle is used as it is outfitted with an instructor's brake. So you must be able to transfer onto the driving instructor's the driver's seat of their vehicle. And if you're not able to, then special accommodations would be required. You could think of the on-road evaluation as your first lesson with driving with adaptive driving controls. So at the beginning of the lesson or the on-road portion, the instructor will first show you how to use the adaptive driving controls with the vehicle in a parked position. Most drivers will then progress to driving in the parking lot or in quiet residential areas, and some experienced drivers may also progress to driving on main roads. Sometimes a couple of different types of equipments may be trialed during the on-road assessment. If at the time of your initial assessment you need guidance on different types of accessible vehicle options that may be suitable for you, definitely ask your occupational therapist, as they can guide you and connect you with the. Often for clients that are going through an assessment where a third-party insurance payer is involved, so again, those that have been injured through a workplace accident or through because of an automobile accident, the OT would also be required to come up with a detailed vehicle prescription for funding consideration. At the end of the assessment, the therapist will review the results of your assessment and the recommendations for you. The therapist will provide their opinion on how likely it is for you to become a driver or let you know of any possible barriers. If you are considered a good candidate for training on adaptive driver controls, the therapist will let you know of how many sessions you will likely require in order to get proficient with the use of the equipment. The therapist will also review the expectations for training. So, for example, that you participate in 2 to 3 lessons a week and avoid any prolonged breaks during your training process to ensure regular and continuous practice. As mentioned before, the therapist will also provide education on vehicle and mobility equipment options for you and let you know of reputable vehicle modifiers in your area. They may also help you or be able to help you explore funding options. Next, let's talk a little bit about training. Driver training sessions typically take place in the instructor's vehicle only with the instructor. The OT does not sit in on all the sessions. However, they will communicate with the driving instructor regularly to discuss and keep an eye on top of your progress. Each session is typically an hour long. The whole goal of driver training sessions is for you to gain proficiency with the equipment, with the adaptive driving controls on all road types and in various traffic situations. The number of lessons you will require depends on various factors, including, for example, diagnosis. Do you have a purely physical issue, or is there, for example, some cognitive issues that are present because of a secondary diagnosis, for example, traumatic brain injury? How about experience? Do you have experience driving a vehicle, or are you a novice driver? If you haven't driven before, do you at least have some experience driving a bike or another motorized vehicle such as a go-kart or golf cart? Because these could still help you in terms of acquiring driving skills. Also, the type of equipment matters. So something like a left-foot accelerator generally requires less training, for example, than hand controls. Right, so I think we have here that typically experienced drivers with hand controls generally need about anywhere from 8 to 12 hours, and on average about 10 hours of practice. Once you have completed training, you would then participate in an on-road reassessment with the occupational therapist and with the driving instructor. A standardized route is used, which entails about 35 to 45 minutes of driving. And the route includes various road types and various traffic situations. During the reassessment, the occupational therapist is basically assessing you to make sure that you're medically fit to drive with the adaptive driving controls. If you are successful during the reassessment, at that point the OT or certified driver rehab specialist would send a report to the licensing authority, and the condition for adaptive driving controls would get added to your driver's license. You would also be issued with a prescription for the equipment so that you could get your vehicle equipped with the adaptive driving controls by a reputable vehicle modifier. Once your vehicle has been outfitted with the required equipment, the occupational therapist will typically do a final vehicle checkout in your own vehicle to make sure that everything is working well for you. And this process may include a drive in your own vehicle with the driving instructor. The ultimate goal of the whole driver rehab process is getting you driving with the use of adaptive driving controls and with an accessible vehicle that addresses your mobility needs. I'm sure I speak not only for myself when I say that this is the most rewarding part of our jobs as occupational therapists working in the field of driver rehab. We know that getting back to driving is usually a monumental goal for people after a spinal cord injury and other physical injuries, and opens many doors of opportunities for community mobility and improved quality of life for our clients. Lastly, we did want to address that there are situations where people are looking for accessible vehicles for their own use or family members' use as a passenger. In this situation, you could contact or connect with the reputable vehicle modifier to explore options for accessible vehicles and mobility equipment. Most OTs working in driver rehab also perform vehicle access assessments that could help clients or their family members explore suitable options. There are numerous equipment out on the market that can make entering and exiting a vehicle or loading or unloading a mobility device into and out of a vehicle much easier. With that being said, I'll hand the presentation back to Tammy to gloss over some of the common accessible vehicle and mobility equipment options that are out on the market.
Thank you, Shaw. So what types of driving controls can help me operate the vehicle? Well, primary controls are the gas, brake, and steering. They're the controls that must be accessed constantly while you are driving. And so there are many different types available. Your medical condition and your vehicle compatibility with these types of controls will dictate what is going to work best for you. But here are some examples of hand controls: a left foot accelerator and what is called a steering ring. Also, there's different types of steering devices that can help you drive. Some may be quite simple and some may be a little bit more complicated. Here are some spinner knobs and some spinner knob attachments that may be useful to help you steer based on what your needs are. What are some secondary controls to help me drive? So sometimes basic devices, such as a crossover lever, which is the first picture, can help. And other times you need to relocate secondary controls. And secondary controls are those things that we need while we're driving intermittently, but not constantly. So as Shaw said earlier, left, right signals, high beams, the horn, the wiper cycle, wash, but it can also include things like cruise control. So what are your options if you need more help with driving? Well, sometimes the simple stuff is not going to work. And so we need to look at high-tech options. That may include digital controls, a computer interface, reduced effort or zero effort steering, push button gear shift, or voice activated controls. Obviously, as things become more complicated, the cost of these items also increase. And not all driver rehabilitation programs have access to these types of controls. So it's certainly, if you are thinking this is where you're going to need some assistance, is to look at which programs may offer assistance in this area. What equipment can help you get in and out of the vehicle? Well, there's many different types. They can range from electronic transfer board, as it is in the first picture, which elevates you to the level so that you can do a lateral transfer. And that is a powered device. There's also a situation where you would transfer into your vehicle, typically a minivan, and you transfer from your wheelchair to the driver's seat in what is called a 6-way power transfer seat base. Big fancy name. Sometimes we want to have the seat come out to get you, and therefore we would be looking at an option such as a lowering seat or an orbiting seat. They used to be called valet seats. How can you stow or retrieve your mobility device? Well, again, it depends on the type of vehicle that you have. And I can't stress enough how important it is for you to have a compatible device for your vehicle and a compatible device for your mobility aid. So there are internal lifts, which you would bring in, which is in the bottom corner. Bring your wheelchair or your mobility device into your vehicle. And then there are external lifts, in which case you have to transport your mobility device outside of your vehicle. There's going to be some more details in the coming seminars about wheelchair accessible vans. So here I just want to highlight that there are many different types of entry designs. The one that I'm showing here is a rear entry. This is typically used in a passenger application or a pediatric application. So you would not be accessing your vehicle this way if you were planning on driving. This type of application is the most common application. It's called a side entry. And there are many different types of vehicles, different vans. This is a Chrysler Pacifica shown here that can be adapted in this way. It's very important to make sure that you don't go out and buy your vehicle before you've been evaluated. Often people want to get a couple of steps ahead, or they want to get something that maybe is secondhand and therefore, you know, have a vehicle already. And I caution you on doing that for various reasons. One is it may not meet your specific needs. And so there could be a lot of costs and expense, as well as time, trying to adapt or modify that vehicle. And that's if it can be adapted or modified, because adaptations don't always comply with different years of vehicle models. So that's important for you to research, and that's where a dealer would come into play, where you can ask those types of questions, but also having that assessment with an occupational therapist or CDRS. Can you drive from a pickup truck instead? Vans tend not to be that sexy, and trucks are very sexy. So some people, and primarily gentlemen, but not always, are very interested in getting a truck and whether or not that's feasible. And the short answer is yes. Again, dependent on the compatibility of you, your mobility device, and the vehicle that you have or would like to have. There is also the cost, which is very important, which we've tried to stress throughout the presentation. Your budget and knowing what your budget is very important. Especially if we are trying to justify to a third-party payer why a sexy truck is necessary over a minivan. What about an SUV? So interestingly enough, this is a fairly new situation where Braun Ability has developed a conversion for a Chevy Traverse. And so therefore there is now a SUV on the market that can allow us to have the individual transfer into the vehicle and or drive from the vehicle, which is a pretty exciting step. So the next part I want to sort of cover off in the remaining moments here is that there are a variety of funding sources available. And unfortunately, to go over all of the different funding sources would take another hour and a half to do. So what I want to say is that there are many different variations on the theme here. It does depend, unfortunately, where you live and what you may be eligible for. So third-party payers, such as insurance, WSIB, which is workplace insurance here in Ontario, often can afford significant conversions, dependent on, again, the justification that can be provided, as well as what your needs are. But there is obviously a cap on how much third-party payers are able to pay. So having an occupational therapist, CDRS, and also a dealer who can provide that justification needed based on your function and include options that are going to work for you versus options that are not going to work for you. Typically, third-party payers want new vehicles. So if you've gone out and purchased a secondhand vehicle, they may not be inclined to put the adaptive equipment, which may be a new thing, into your van. That is something to be mindful of. Some extended health benefits through insurance, private insurance, will cover the cost of the assessment as well as some of the adaptations. It's always a good idea, if you have extended health benefits, to check with your carrier to see if they offer coverage for occupational therapy, as the functional driving assessment is an occupational therapy assessment, and or if they provide coverage for assistive devices, because adaptive equipment for driving is considered an assistive device. There's also other government funding options. For example, in Ontario, we have access to a program called the March of Dimes that can contribute up to $15,000 for vehicle adaptations. However, there is a strict criteria that must be followed. And that's important for everyone to know, that not everybody would qualify. Also, charities, family and friends, and also crowdfunding are viable options to help with funding. The best thing to do would be to ask your OT to assist you with this based on your jurisdiction, where you live in Ontario, where you live in Canada, and based on your diagnosis, as some diagnoses have some associations available to them that support this, either with scholarships or grants. So the take-home message here is that try to find an experienced occupational therapist who is a member of ADED and is certified by ADED, as a CDRS. Work with a reputable vehicle modifier. If they are an AMITA dealer, you know that that box is checked. If they are not an AMITA dealer, have a list of questions available to ensure that what you are having installed in your vehicle has been installed correctly and safely. Also, determine what your community mobility goals are. Do you want to just go to the grocery store once a week, or do you want to be able to travel across Canada? Those things make a difference in the amount of money and effort that is going to be going into your driving. And also research the funding options and develop a budget. Having 3 steps ahead of the process is great, as long as you haven't gone too far that to undo something, we need to go back and redo it. I'm always a big fan of looking for efficiencies within a system. And so the more prepared that my clients are when they come to me, the better. But at the same time, I'm here as a guide. The occupational therapists and the CDRSs are there as a guide. And NAMITA is here to make sure that those dealers that are NAMITA members are following the guidelines and standards that are set out to keep you safe. And now some questions and answers.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. I am spotlighted. Sorry. Thank you, Tamily. So now it is time to move on to our question and answer period. Lubna Aslan has been collecting all of your questions from the chat. And if you do still have any questions, you can still submit them through the chat function. Please click on the raise hand icon if the chat function is not accessible to you, and we will unmute you and you can ask your question on screen. And we will also be posting contact coordinates in the chat box for any further questions you may have. Lubna, I'm going to pass it on to you for the questions.
The first question I see is, will this presentation be available to the attendees for later? So, Shah or Tammy,
I believe Leandra said that it would be available, that it's been recorded and it will be available. Does that sound accurate?
Yes. I think I'm talking about the PowerPoint presentation. Is that something that you are okay with sharing, Tammy?
That's not a problem for me. Shah?
Yeah, that should be fine.
Yeah.
So what we will do is we will share the email addresses of the peer program coordinators. And what you can do is you can get in touch with the peer program coordinator of your region, and they will send the PowerPoint to you. All right. Okay. I'm watching this on behalf of my daughter. She's too young to have held a license before her injury, but hopes to start driving next year. Would she need to go through a driver rehab center as a first step before she starts the drive test process?
Do you want to answer that, or do you want me to?
Oh, go ahead, Emily.
So as a novice driver, in order to participate in the driving rehabilitation program at a driving assessment center in Ontario, the individual would have to first have a G1 license, because we have to take them on the road to train them. However, there's a little bit of a process that has to be established. So they need to have that first step established. Sometimes what happens is that a physician will notify the Ministry of Transportation, and a letter will be sent to the individual advising that they need to go and obtain their G1 license to be able to drive, and it will be restricted. It'll have a restriction on it that will say that they have to participate in a functional driving assessment and or rehabilitation training. It usually is eligible for both, so that they go through this process first. And then once we've addressed the medical condition, so we've signed off, so let's say they require some adaptive equipment for steering and being able to access secondary controls because one arm might not be working, or they may require hand controls. Once we've done our training with them and we've signed off on the fact that they've been able to do that, they could continue on and do a driver's ed program, for example, if they wanted to after the fact. Some people do that. They continue with their practicing before they're eligible for their next level of licensing. But sometimes doctors don't flag that to the Ministry of Transportation, And it would be left up to the parent and or the client to notify the ministry to say, I would like to be able to have my son or daughter have this opportunity, and that will start the process at the Ministry of Transportation.
Yeah, I think usually when you apply for a license, there are some check boxes, right? Like, do you have a medical health issue that could affect your driving?
Yeah.
So, you know, if that gets reported by the daughter, then likely the ministry would require additional medical documentation and then direct her to do a driving assessment.
Mm-hmm. I hope that answered the question.
Perfect. And then there's a question: Is there extension pedals for modification?
Yes.
Yeah, I could answer that. So there is something called pedal extension. So if someone's feet are not quite reaching the pedals can be built up with extensions. So yes, there is a short answer. Again, even for that kind of conversion, typically you would have to go through the driver rehab assessment and training process to get that type of equipment.
How do you pay for this type of vehicle if you were born with your disability and don't have an insurance payout to buy it?
That's a very tricky, very tricky question. And I mean, the short answer is you have to be very, very resourceful. So researching charities in your area that may be able to provide funding. Again, in Ontario, you may be eligible for March of Dimes, funding through March of Dimes through the Home and Vehicle Modification Program. There might be similar funds available in other provinces through, other governmental grants. So you have to do a lot of research looking at governmental assistance, charities, local churches and volunteer organizations, sending out letters to your MP. People have crowdfunding's been really cool over the last 6-7 years. A lot of people have been very successful at raising a lot of funds by doing online fundraising or crowdfunding through, what are some of those popular sites? GoFundMe.
Yeah,
and things like that. So, unfortunately, Tamale and I it always hurts that, we know that the costs are very prohibitive for driver rehab, that it's not cheap, and the cost to get the vehicle outfitted is very expensive. And we wish there was a lot more funding out there, but there isn't. So bottom line, you have to be resourceful, you have to do a lot of research, and you have to ask sometimes for the money.
So I'll just mention as well that on the NAMITA website, when we launch it, we have now added, or it will be available shortly. It's supposed to be available in the next month or so, that we have added a section for consumers that look, and for other OTs that may be looking on behalf of their clients that are not in the field of driver rehabilitation. We have added funding sources from across Canada. So we have be available on that website. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's the most common. I find that unfortunately, most times we have to cobble together a bit of a plan to be able to look at all of those things. There are, for example, one of the hand control manufacturers located here in Canada, there is a trust available, in which case, if they require those particular hand controls from that manufacturer and we apply, we may be able to get that funded so that those hand controls would be free. Now, that does not mean that they are installed free. There's still a cost for installation, but that can sometimes be a small savings. And if we cobble together a bit of a plan, I've had 2 clients in the last 2 years that have been eligible for that funding. So it is possible. There also used to be a program called NOVA, through the United States that was also applicable in Canada, which does not exist anymore. Unfortunately, they have disbanded. But there's also a program called Trillium, which looks at financing. Thank you.
getting tighter, it seems.
Yeah. So I just want to make one point, because I've seen a few of the little words coming up in the chat. So I need to make it clear that when you research, you need to make sure you research in Canada. And there is a reason for that, because many people, I have many clients right now actually, that find something really cool on the internet, whether that's a vehicle, whether that's a type of vehicle adaptation, or whether that's a wheelchair lift, that is available only in Germany, or that is available only in the United States. So you need to make sure that the resources that you are searching out are eligible to cross the border into Canada and are able to be found here. Many of the things, even with Brawnability is the United States, but we can access some of those things in Canada. They have a European line we cannot access. So it's important that you know what's available in the area. And again, our job is to help guide the individual through that. But when you're doing your research on the internet, make sure that you're not researching something that's only available in Germany, because we can't get it here.
All right. I'm going to read the next few questions because I'm really cognizant of the time. It is 4:35. Do you know the average cost from assessment to prescription of modifications needed?
Depends on the modification.
So, yeah. Well, if someone's coming for an initial assessment, and let's just say they need training on hand controls, right? So initial assessment, 10 training sessions, and then a reassessment, that whole process right there is going to be at least a couple $1,000s right there, right? Anywhere from, in Ontario, about $2,000 to $2,200, I'm guessing, for initial assessment, 10 sessions, and a reassessment. So that whole process, by the time you get a prescription, at least a couple $1,000s.
Thank you. I just purchased a used vehicle from Gold Line in London, and a question regarding insurance. Can someone advise a budget number for annual insurance cost for us with a perfect driving record?
I think that's going to be really tough for any one of us to do. Obviously, we're not insurance people. But it's a good question. We get a lot of questions about insurance. And my answer is always, well, go back and speak to the insurance company, right? Say, if we're purchasing this vehicle and it costs this much because it's been outfitted with special equipment, then the insurance might be higher if you're trying to, for example, insure that equipment as well, right? A basic van versus a side entry van, the side entry van is going to be a lot more. So the replacement cost is going to be more, and then likely the insurance is going to be more. So sorry, we can't give any budget specific answers, and we can only direct you back to the insurance company.
Yeah.
Would someone with their G2 be considered a novice driver?
No.
Yes and no. It really depends on the level. Honestly, it's not so much whether someone has a G1 or G2. Someone might have a G1 in Canada, but they've driven, for example, I've had this last week where this person drove in India and then drove in London, and then they didn't drive for a while, and so they lost their license and they had to come. They migrated to Canada and got their G1. So I would say it's more a matter of how much driving experience they have. Versus just having a G1 or G2. I mean, I still would consider someone a G2 if they, as fairly novice, if they don't have a lot of driving experience. Like if they just did 10 lessons and went for a road test, that's not a lot of experience versus someone that's been driving 40 years and now has an injury and is going through the driver rehab process. The person that has 40 years of driving experience is probably going to maybe only need 7-8 lessons versus a person that had 10 lessons and did their G2 and now is coming through the doors for driving assessment after an hour and a half would likely need more.
I had a spine surgery from C1 to C7. My neck movement is limited. How vehicle modifications help in rear view and blind spot view while driving helps?
Yeah, so there are things like expanded rear view mirrors, auxiliary side mirrors, reverse camera is huge. So there are things out there. What I tell people is from a physical perspective, honestly, you could have very limited neck movement and very limited even finger movement, and you could still drive. It's just that the cost of the equipment that you're going to need, if you only have this much movement, you're going to need digital equipment, which maybe costs
$100,000.
at least $50,000, $60,000 minimum just for that. Plus all the other stuff you're going to need. Likely you're looking at costs of more than $100,000 for the equipment. So, you know, most things from a physical standpoint can be compensated for. Or you could just wait another 6-7 years until vehicles drive themselves. And at that point, me and Tammy hopefully will be retired. Yeah. We definitely won't have jobs anymore. But again, I mean, automation is making is leaps and bounds, right? So we already have vehicles that are driving themselves. We just need for that to become more affordable, more common ground, and for the laws to kind of update to allow people to drive vehicles that just drive themselves. So, you know, hopefully there's going to be much more opportunity in the future for people with disabilities in driving with automation.
Yeah. So the next question is there any solution to driving with paralyzed hands? So.
Ooh, that's a tricky one.
It's the same answer as before.
There's always some things. There's been, I know up in, sorry, I can't really say name, but up in Barrie, a few of our peers just recently did like a foot steering for someone.
Mm-hmm. And again, in different geographical areas across Canada. So for example, in Quebec. Okay, so in Quebec, the government covers the cost of these things if you're eligible. And so the cost of the assessment, the cost of training, the cost of the conversion if necessary. And so something like foot steering, which is an expensive thing, is more common. In Ontario, we don't have the same kind of fee support, and therefore you see less applications of that. But it is possible, yes.
Can I, Libna, if you don't mind, there was just one more question, and I'll tie in Leandra's question because I know we've kind of run out of time. But with regards to funding, you know, the other thing is looking at used vehicles. You know, obviously we say with caution, right? Don't just go and buy a vehicle assuming it's going to work. Make sure some thought and effort and research has gone into it. Maybe consult with an occupational therapist, talk to a reputable vehicle modifier. There are sometimes used vehicles that you can get at a very heavily discounted cost as compared to a new vehicle that might fit your budget. The best way to go about getting a used vehicle, I would say, would be going through a reputable vehicle modifier, because they're going to be able to look at you, look at your equipment, and kind of assess what you might need, and then find a vehicle for you that's used that can be tweaked for you. Okay. The other thing Leandra asked just about renting a vehicle in Canada for a road trip, if you only need basic hand controls, yes, right? So I think the big rental companies have hand controls. I think maybe even left foot accelerators available within their fleet. So yes, if you are taking a road trip, you would be able to rent a vehicle in Canada and also in the US, I believe, as well. I think it's,
yes.
No, you would have to make sure you do your research beforehand. Don't just show up at the airport assuming you're going to have a vehicle with hand controls. But yes, they are readily available through rental agencies.
And they can't charge you more.
And I believe they need a 24-hour notice if you're renting in the USA.
Yeah.
So that they can make it accessible. So some very quick yes or no questions. Will something like Ford Tourneo, a small wheelchair accessible vehicle in UK, be approved by Canadian Insurance Board?
I don't even know what that is, but I would have to say likely not.
Yeah. So that was what I was talking about, that European thing.
Okay.
So it's unlikely. I mean, Transport Canada has some very strict rules about what vehicles can be adapted and modified.
Brought into the country as well. There's rules about that.
Yeah. Oh. So if you're needing to know that, I would reference you to Transport Canada website. You can just Google that and type in your vehicle and see if it's on their list.
Is there an advocacy effort ongoing to the government to make this a more equitable process for people with disabilities?
Well, that's a very good question. We are always at NAMITA looking for partners to be able to do that. I mean, right now, obviously, COVID has taken the lion's share of government time and efforts, but we are trying our best to try to advocate for that. And the louder the voice, the better. So we would be very interested in looking at how we might have some synergies with different organizations, yours being one of them.
Thank you. Who is the first person I contact if I want to get back on the road? What would be the rough cost to raise the pedals?
Oh, gosh.
It's too many dependency factors. We can't comment on the cost, but you need to find a functional assessment center. So Google Functional Assessment Center if you're in Ontario, and it will take you to the Ministry of Transportation's list, and then find one of those assessment centers that's within your area and call them and ask them.
Would the cost of a driving assessment for someone who has an insurance or funding as opposed to if they are paying out of pocket be different, I think?
Yes.
Okay.
Short answer is yes.
Yes.
The reason is because the insurance companies or third-party payers require more from us. So therefore the cost is higher. We have to do further documentation. We have to submit treatment plans. It's very complicated.
Look at a driving assessment report with a vehicle prescription for an insurance company might be anywhere from 12 to 20 pages, probably on average at least 15 pages, versus a self-pay.
And my insurance rate would go up. Would WSIB cover the increase? Oh, so it is a question, sorry.
That's a WSIB question.
Yeah, that is a WSIB question, but generally speaking, WSIB in Ontario does not pay for the cost of the vehicle. They will only pay for the cost of the conversion or equipment that has to be introduced into the vehicle to make it accessible. So WSIB would pay for the initial assessment, they'll pay for the training, they'll pay for, if the person needs like, some special lift in the back of their vehicle, they'll pay for the lift and any other things like that. But the base cost of the vehicle, they would not pay for. And I cannot imagine that they would pay for the differential cost in insurance. I'm going to have to say no. Yeah. I don't think that's the case.
There are circumstances where insurance companies will cover the cost of a replacement vehicle prior to the adaptations being made, but it's rare.
All right. And another question is, these are the last two questions. I only have 2 more minutes.
Yes.
Has there been any electric vehicles adapted to drive from a wheelchair? No. As a quadriplegic, I wouldn't be able to put gas in the vehicle, so charging it will be more accessible.
Yeah, so I'm currently working on 2 Teslas. So that is a possibility. But right now, no, it's very difficult. I mean, there is justification, certainly, and I've done many hybrids. So hybrid right now seems to be a little bit easier, but when you're getting into more complicated controls, there's a compatibility issue. And there's also compatibility issues with high-end vehicles that are European made with speaking or communicating with some of the electronic controls that we are trying to integrate into the vehicle. So it's very important that what Tesla models, you need to reach out. Can't get into it right now, but it is possible depending on, again, what the requirements are for the individual, right? It comes back to that.
Right. If a member of the disability community doesn't anticipate ever having the financial resource to purchase a new accessible vehicle, is there still value in going through the driver rehab process?
Well, if they were being transported as a passenger, or if they wanted to look at rental of vehicles in the future, then yes. But if they are never thinking they're going to drive, then the answer would likely be save your money. It really comes down to what your goals are, and that's what Shaw was talking about in terms of community mobility goals and knowing sort of, why you would want to go through that process. Do you have anything to add, Shaw?
No, I think that covers it. I mean, you know, sometimes people just want to go through the initial assessment as well to know if it's possible for them to go back to driving.
Yeah.
So people with a dual diagnosis, right? So let's just say someone has a spinal cord injury because of a car accident or a motorcycling accident, but they also then had a head injury as well, and there's a degree of, you know, mild traumatic brain injury. So someone in that situation might want to know, like, you know, with my brain injury and some of these cognitive issues that I'm having with my memory and concentration, you know, is it even feasible for me to go back to driving?
That's true.
So, you know, sometimes just going through the initial assessment, sometimes people are kind of just testing it out. Okay, is this a possibility? Like I said, most of the people coming in for a physical condition, like, you know, we could find a way to get them back to driving, and the answer is usually yes. But again, we do encounter, like, I've had people that have physical conditions coupled with other issues or have a diagnosis of something like MS, where they have physical impairment, but there's also now cognitive changes involved, and they're just not sure, should I continue driving or not? So sometimes it's just to get an idea of prognosis. Is it likely I'm going to get back to driving? Opinion on driving abilities.
Okay.
Awesome. I think that might have been the last question that we had in the chat. I do see somebody with their hand up. Leander, if you want to unmute yourself and ask that question. I'm not sure if it's a question.
Hi, can you
the high five.
Yeah, the high five.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So the question regarding filling up at the gas station. So if you go to www.fuelservice.org, Shell, the oil company, has joined an app where the nearest gas station of theirs can be identified, where an attendant will actually come out to you and fill up for you. And this may be adopted in the future by additional gas stations, but right now it's an international app, and it's been adopted by Shell in Canada. So that is a possible solution for individuals that would find it problematic to exit the vehicle, fill up, and enter the vehicle, because obviously self-serve is what's, you know, we see most commonly. Full serve gas stations are very rare. So if you go to www.fuelservice.org, you can look into that app, and it could be a viable tool to help individuals in that situation. We may share that in our resources at the end of the series as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Leander, for that information. And I believe we've finished all of our questions. We've gone through all of our questions. So we would like to thank everyone for their questions. If you do have any remaining questions for our guests, Lubna had put into the chat box some email addresses. You can reach out to your local peer program coordinator, and we'll get those questions answered for you. I would like to thank David Parton, Tamalee Stone, and Shaw Bacher for their very comprehensive and informative presentation today. Also, a huge thank you to our series sponsor, Silver Cross Automotive, our Part 1 Getting Started sponsor, Namita Canada, our provincial sponsor, IBC, and finally, thank you to all of the organizations helping us share this series with the disability community across Canada. Please do join us 1 week from today for part 2 of our series, as we delve into the latest accessible vehicles and modifications with Silver Cross Automotive, VMI, and ADAPT Solutions. And then a thank you to everyone who attended today. We encourage you to provide us with your comments and feedback at events@sciontario.org. We do hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening, and see you for part 2. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.